Hello, hello, hello. Today is Thursday and it's April 30th. We are at the end of April already. I don't even know where the time went. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Power Live. I am your host, Dr. Tangi Reed Marshall, and I'm excited to welcome you here today. I want to talk this week about assessments, but from a different lens. Here's what we know already. The testing is over for some of you and almost over for others of you. And we also know that this time of year when testing is almost over it is over, our environments shift dramatically. If you were here a few weeks ago, I told this story about myself when we came to the end of testing season and I was requiring my students to bring their learning materials to class and they didn't, and we had a clash. And one of my colleagues came to me and asked me if I was teaching still. And I said, yes. And she said I was making them feel bad. Well, if we do not take the time to design what happens this time of year, it's going to create an environment that is opposite the kind of environment that we want. But before we go any further, I want to do what I always do every week is ask you what you're thankful for. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here in California at the 10th anniversary of Education Leaders of Color Conference. It's EdLock. I'm a new member. I'm so excited, and I'm here for the conference this week. And I also want to invite you to subscribe, like, share, leave us a comment to our channel. We are growing. We're going to be 2 years old soon. And we are asking our subscribers to share the show with 2 people and to get us to our goal of 200 subscribers by our 2nd birthday, which is coming up in a few weeks. So please go ahead, like, subscribe, share. If you are a subscriber, thank you so much for trusting us. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. So let's go ahead and get started or continue actually. This time of year carries a different weight. The weight here is, believe it or not, the weight of autonomy and a different kind of autonomy. All year long, you have been our leaders, our classroom teachers. You have been really under the weight of your curriculum. You've been bound by pacing calendars. You've been bound by benchmark assessments, curriculum assessments, the calendar, pacing guides. You've been bound by all of that, marching you to this time of year, this summative time of year. And right now, the game is about to shift because you are no longer going to be bound by that same level of curricular insistency, I'll say, right? We hear words like fidelity and, using your curriculum with fidelity. I will say curricular insistence, because we are insisting, or most times you are insisted to or required to use your curriculum in a particular way. But after your summative assessments are done, you are no longer bound by those things. But then the challenge becomes, with this time, how will you use it in a way that continues learning? So in today's show, we are really going to talk about some ways in which leaders can avoid the common mistakes that are made this time of year. And that's really important to think about. And every week, I ground this conversation in power because Let's Talk Power Live is all about having the honest, open, operationalized conversation about the way in which power operates in education. And so we know what the definition is. And if you don't, I'm going to share that definition with you right now because I share it every week. And here it is. So education is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power, the control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the critical influence of judgment are critical elements common to democratic design, power theory, and educational philosophy. That is what power, the capital P power in education is all about. And if you ever thought that power in education wasn't real, I want you to consider this. As of last school year, the ending of the 2024-2025 school year, we were facing the largest removal of instructional materials, particularly books, since the McCarthy era in the 1950s, 7 decades ago. And we have more books off shelves than we had then. That's power. That's the control of information embedded in that decision. And so then when we talk about instructional power, what do we mean? We mean the actual use of one's power, the ownership of the work, the environment, and the relationships you create. But here is the technical definition I've come up with. So it says, instructional power can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job-related authority to afford or constrain access to a student's learning. And that really is what it's about. You either afford opportunity or you constrain it. And you do that through your use of the power associated with your level and with your authority scale, right? So authority scale, as an educator in the classroom, your purview is basically what happens within the four walls of your classroom. But if you are a building leader, you know you have the purview of the entire building. But this time of year is unique. And we really want to talk about what it is that's happening this time of year and some ideas that we know, not necessarily data points in terms of the hard data that you're used to me sharing with you, but I want to share some information that really will ring true with you. So here it is. Here's what we know. The post-assessment learning environment. Discipline tends to increase after major breaks. Now, what this means is students are going home, they're in their home, they're in their personal environments, and sometimes those environments are not the same as the school environment. And so when students come back from a break, they are bringing their home environment to the school, which might not have the same level of discipline. And so the discipline will increase after the break. You often have these resets. We do our own October reset for this very reason. And then the pattern suggests that schools need strong routines when normal structures weaken. So the normal structure of school has shifted significantly during the testing time. And what that means is rather than leaving that time to itself so that students can wind down, they can take a break, they can take a breather, they can reset, we need strong structures in place so that the environment does not break down. Consider this. As a leader in a building, a leader in a classroom, you have worked really hard all year to create a certain kind of environment, a high academic expectation environment. And if during or after assessments, you don't have a design for learning, everything you worked for during the school year is going to break down. And so that's why this session today is really important to consider. What have you designed for your post-assessment learning environment? So post-assessment time should be planned as real instructional time, not downtime. That's critical. We tend to use this idea that it is around taking a break, they're finished, let's go on to winding things down, breaking down the year. But what you have is an instructional opportunity. And I want to share with you something that I outline in our book. You hear me talk about in the book, the 4 dimensions of instructional power. Well, there's another element to that where I focus on curricular autonomy. And I haven't talked a lot about curricular autonomy because many schools around the country are not allowing their classroom educators to have that curricular autonomy. A lot of schools are having their educators follow lockstep what's called high quality instructional material designs, HQIM, right? They are requiring their educators to use high quality instructional materials so that they are making sure every student has access to grade level instruction. That is correct. Every student needs access to grade level instruction. And if you are in a district where they have what's been deemed a high quality instructional set of materials, absolutely you should follow them. But what that means is your instructional curricular autonomy is definitely truncated. So I'm going to share what the design in the book that I outlined for you. So here we go. The curricular autonomy piece sits sort of around the 4 dimensions. And you see that red star right there. What that is showing you is this. Throughout the school year, you have restricted curricular autonomy, meaning you have to follow the curriculum that you have been given. Your autonomy is restricted. Now, while you see on the top, my hand is my top left, if you see where it says unfettered curricular autonomy, many teachers say they want that. And I will tell you, I've been in places where they've had that. And it creates more inequity and more instructional variance than students deserve. So the restricted curricular autonomy is what you face because you are bound, right? You're bound by time, you're bound by materials, you are bound by benchmarks. After all that is finished, you step into a space where you see that blue dot. And that blue dot right there, the blue star rather, that blue star is your calibrated curricular autonomy. What does that mean? That means that your autonomy is not bound by time or space, so to say. You now have the opportunity to do more than you may have done before. And that is an opportunity that often gets wasted. And that's why if you are thinking about this, you know what, we really haven't designed it. I want to challenge you to really consider what has been the curricular focus for after testing. And a lot of times, and you probably heard me talk about this if you were here last week, I talked about 2 things. I'm going to show you what I talked about last week. I talked about misplaced compassion and unnamed deficit thinking. What is that? The misplaced compassion this time of year, once assessment is over, comes across like you care about your students. They've worked so hard. Let's give them some time to relax. Let's take them, not so much take them on trips, because trips, I love trips, right? But let's give them a break. That comes across as care. But if it is not monitored, if it is not really trained well or really thought through consciously, that care is going to become carelessness. And then your environment will suffer. But then the deficit thinking is, well, they didn't learn that much anyway. So why are we going to keep teaching? Those kids that, they probably didn't do that well. So why are we continuing to push? We're going to have to reteach anyway. So why don't I just stop right now and not worry about it? That's what happens when we have the unnamed deficit thinking. We don't call it, we don't say I'm engaging in deficit thinking. We evidence our deficit thinking. And so I want to challenge you as a leader in your building. And I also want to challenge you as a leader in your classroom to consider how you might really rethink this time of year so that it is designed so that you avoid the deterioration. We really want students to have an opportunity to do more during this time of year than they have done in previous years. But you can do what you've always done. You really can. Or you can take the time to design differently. And once again, I'm going to stop right now. Please make sure you hit the like, share, and the subscribe button. Again, we're going to turn 2 in a little while. We want to get to our 200 subscribers. So please help us get there by liking, subscribing, and sharing. And then share the link with 2 people so that they can also subscribe, like, and share. All right. So talking about design, we don't want chaos. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was back in the classroom this time of year after testing was over, there was a very clear signal that testing was over and school was over. You know how we showed up? Teachers were allowing their students to pack up their classrooms for the summer. Now they had weeks left, and they would come to school every day and pack up the teacher's classroom. That's one way I showed it. There are videos out, I see them out all the time right now, of teachers being checked out for the rest of the year. And then what would happen is the behavior would become so, I'm going to just say terrible. The behavior was terrible, and students would get suspended. So our suspension rates would go up after testing, not because kids were necessarily bad or more bad or badder that time of year. It was because the environment was designed for chaos and not designed for learning. So when you have this level of calibrated curricular autonomy, do not waste this time as a leader in a building and as a leader in a classroom, coming together to think about a design for what it could look like at this time of the year. And I want to give you some ways, some ideas to think about avoiding, and then we'll get on to our other piece. So here's some common mistakes that I'm going to challenge you to avoid. Number one, don't signal that learning is over. Because when learning is over, then the behavior is going to signal that. And then school really does become a glorified babysitting service. And that's not what it's meant to be. And then the other mistake is replacing meaningful work with just filler time. Again, it will then turn your environment into that babysitting adventure that you don't want. Allowing the environment to drift. Hold steady to the structures, strategies, policies, and procedures that created a tight culture in the first place. What got you to the culture that you had that you liked? You had an ideal culture in mind. And maybe you didn't get all the way there, but I promise you this. If at this time of year you're not having a design mentality, you'll never get there. And then using discipline in place of design. Discipline is not a design tool. Want to make sure we're clear about that. Discipline is not a design tool. Do not use discipline in place of a clear, tight instructional design that leads students to learn more, do more this time of year. So the question is not, what are we going to do with this time? The question is, what message are we sending to our students about this time? And not only is it about what message we're sending to our students, it's also if you're the leader in the building. And this is particular to middle school. Our 6th and our 7th grade, I'm going to hone in on them for a moment. 8th grade is a little bit different because they're going to high school. So their mindset is a little bit closer to that of a 12th grader because they're going into a new environment and they're wrapping up this time of year. But our 6th and 7th graders must have a designed time frame so that they are continuing to learn. So what is the message being sent to both the teachers and to our students, particularly our middle school students? We want to make sure that at this time of year, when their development is beginning to shift, it is into high gear. And if you follow the show, you probably remember I did an entire segment on the adolescent brain, and we're going to be bringing something back on that. So stay tuned for that as well. But this time of year, when the brain is developing into something, preparing them for adolescent brain, you really want to make sure that it's got structure around it. So every week, I give you your power moves. So it's time for our power moves. Let's talk about 3 critical power moves that can really take this time of year and make it what it should be as opposed to what it has been in the past. So power move number 1, anchor mastery. Don't abandon it. What do I mean? Well, you've had benchmarks throughout the school year. You probably recognize some standards where students could really use some extra learning, right? Some extra support. Take this time to review, go back through your data. Look at what students may need some extra learning on and do some designing of lessons and units on that so this time of year becomes structured, and give them the opportunity to master current grade level standards they may have missed, right? And then the application of this is they're going to apply learning in new contexts, not just repeating them. Don't just have them repeating the same thing they did over. Take a design approach, do something different with the same standards, right? It looks like explanation. Students make their thinking visible through speaking and writing. Give them more speaking opportunities, more projects during this time. And then transfer. It looks like transfer. Students connect current learning to new ideas and future content. You're going to be thinking about this time of year as a bridge to the coming year, right? Particularly for our sixth graders and our seventh graders. Make sixth grade a bridge to seventh, seventh a bridge to eighth. And for our eighth grade, particularly on my ELA teams, right? You know what the ninth grade standards are because you've got progression models, you've got the progression standards. You can take a look at the standards for 9, 10, or ninth grade and really begin to design some learning opportunities that follow this model. And what's the impact of this? It elevates mastery to lower the risk of having to reteach next year. Now, you will have to reteach next year, but it won't just be from scratch. Some of the materials, the ideas and concepts are going to feel familiar. Begin to build that familiarity now by allowing this concept of mastery to take hold. Power move number 2, expose what comes next. I just alluded to that, right? Introduce the new concepts and standards. Build critical vocabulary. Design learning experiences they will encounter in the coming year. Look at the coming grade standards for sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, and ninth grade. Look at those for the sixth graders. Look at the seventh grade standards. Seventh graders, introduce those eighth grade standards. Eighth graders, introduce those ninth grade standards. Allow the environment to continue to be a learning environment and not a babysitting service. What's the impact? Next year will feel like a continuation rather than it being completely new. That's important. We can really use this time strategically to ensure that students are experiencing what's going to come next. And then power move number 3, I talked about this, the bridge. Let the current year be a bridge to next year. Align teams around recursive standards. This is particularly essential in the English language arts world. 6th, 7th, and 8th, and 9th grade, the standards are not necessarily new standards. What you have is a deepening of the standards. The language shifts. Here's a critical example. From 5th grade, they write opinion papers. In 6th grade, they write arguments. In 7th grade, they begin to look at critical elements within arguments, really teasing out evidence. They tease out evidence to get to the most relevant support mechanisms for an argument. And in the 8th grade, they go even a step further. So if you can begin to use this time of year as a bridge to next year, looking at some recursive standards, it will be gold. Send the message that learning still matters. And then name some learning priorities. What are the learning priorities that are going to be fostered for next year? What are they? And then create clarity across grades. You have a department chair, you have other instructional leadership members and your team as my building leaders. Go ahead and bring that team together and begin sketching out the instructional focus for next year. That is a critical way to really ensure that this year, this time of year, is not wasted. Again, discipline is not a design tool. And too often this time of year, it serves as a design tool. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about giving students the message that yes, those assessments are finished, but school is not. You might have weeks left, 2 months, 10 weeks. You still have time. And I want to really encourage my building leaders, particularly my middle school building leaders, to ensure that this time of year is as tightly designed and structured as your beginning time of year. And what that does is it sets you up for the instructional focus for the coming year. And that's really important to consider. And so let's talk about some other areas here. This is not about the test. I've said this weeks and weeks and weeks. This time of year, like the other weeks, isn't about the test. It's going to show us a couple of things. Number one, what we truly prioritize. Number two, what we are willing to interrupt. Are we willing to interrupt the status quo and to continue to teach and learn? Or are we going to just do what feels comfortable because we're all tired? And it's going to demonstrate who we think and who we trust should get the opportunity to think. And it's going to tell us who we believe deserves to keep learning. A lot of times, we just shut it all down because we're all tired. And that's one of those unnamed deficit thinking times where we do not believe kids deserve to keep learning, particularly kids in certain communities. So every leadership decision that we make, every decision that gets made right now is a leadership decision. And I really want to challenge you all to understand that this time of year deserves as much attention as the coming year does. And that's all we have for this week's session. I really want to make sure that you help us get to our goal. We want to get to 200 subscribers by our second birthday. And we invite you to like, subscribe, and share. I will see you next week for another episode of Let's Talk Power Live. Have a good one, everybody.